Hi, boys and girls. It's Grandma Sheila again. And our story today is called The Hard Way. Frank, Father called, I have an errand for you to do this morning. Frank said, Okay, Father. And his father said, And as soon as you're done running the errand, you can go play the rest of the afternoon. Frank said, Oh, thank you, Father. What is it you want me to do? And Father, he went over behind the counter of the store and he pulled out a little drawer. And inside that drawer, he pulled out a round, shiny silver dollar. And Father held it up and he said, Frank, I want you to take this to Widow Boardman. Well, Frank knew where she lived. He said, Okay, Father, and Father put it in his hand. Well, Frank started off. He had that silver dollar clutched in his hand, and he remembered his father telling him, Now, be careful and don't lose it. Well, he set off down the road. It was a little ways down the road to get to Mrs. Boardman's. Well, he looked around, the sun was shining, the birds were singing. It was a glorious day, and he was on a 2-week vacation from school. Well, that's the way Frank was feeling. Pretty soon he walked by the schoolhouse, the little country school there, and he walked on past the pond. Well, then he came to the willow patch. Willows are really fun trees. They have branches that hang down like this, just like hair over your face. And there's one thing about willow sticks. You can take a willow stick and you can make things out of it because willow is easy to carve. Well, Frank, he took one look at those willows and he felt in his pocket, and sure enough, his pocket knife was there. He climbed over the fence and he got over to one of those willows and he pulled hard down on one of those willow branches and he took his pocket knife and he cut it off. Then he looked at it and he thought, I should cut another one. So he did the same thing again and he cut that one off. He put his pocket knife back in his pocket and he climbed over the fence. Well, he walked down the road for a while, and there on the side of the road in the grass was a big log that had fallen. A tree had fallen over sometime, and there it lay in the grass. Well, the sun was shining hot now, and it felt delicious. And Frank thought, I have plenty of time. Well, he sat down on the log and he still had those 2 willows in this hand. And he took them out and he thought, I know what I'll make. I'll make 2 whistles. I don't know if you guys have ever whittled anything, but using a pocket knife, you can make all kinds of things if you have a piece of fairly soft wood. Well, he wanted to make whistles. Nothing is quite as fun as making a noise. And he had on purpose got 2 pieces of willow branch that one was bigger around than the other. he took that pocket knife. He cut them the right length. He didn't need them to be very long. And he carefully, so he wouldn't cut himself with his knife, began whittling out the inside of that branch. And when he had done that, he cut holes inside of the edge of that branch. And when he got done, he had carved down a little bit on the one end so that the hole would be littler. And he put it up to his mouth and he blew into it and it made the most beautiful sound. Anyway, he thought it was beautiful. And then he made the second one. And because they were different sizes around, they made a different sound. So he could take one in one hand, one in the other hand, and blow on them and almost make music. Oh, it was great. Well, then he looked up and he thought, well, I better be getting to the widow Boardman's house. So he started back down the side of that road, and it wasn't long till he came to her house. Well, she had a gate. So he went over and he opened the gate and he walked in, and he was careful. He remembered to shut the gate again. Then he was in Widow Boardman's yard, and he thought, I better get out the silver dollar so when I knock on her door, I can give it directly to her. So he took his hand and he stuffed it in his pocket. And he felt around. There was nothing there. He couldn't believe it. He stuck his hand in further and he got a hold of the bottom of the pocket and he pulled it up so it was sticking out of the side of his pants. There was no silver dollar. Well, he stuck his pocket back in and he thought it must be in the other pocket. So he took the other hand and he stuffed that in his pocket and he felt around and he felt around. There was no silver dollar. He pulled that pocket out as well, but there was nothing to see. There was no silver dollar. So now he didn't go up to Mrs. Boardman's door to tell her what was going on. He quickly got out of that yard and he shut the gate very quietly and he started looking for that silver dollar. He retraced his steps. He kept looking down into the grass. He moved the grass around with his feet, but there didn't seem to be a silver dollar there. Finally, he came to that log. He looked down at the ground. He must have accidentally pulled it out, and he thought, maybe when I got my pocket knife out. Well, his pocket knife was still in his pocket, but no silver dollar. So he got down on his hands and knees, and he felt around, hoping that he would find that silver dollar. He looked on one side of the log, then he got up and he went on the other side and he looked. There wasn't a silver dollar there. He looked under the fence. He looked over the fence. He kept pushing his feet. He didn't even pick up his feet. He just scooted them along in hopes that he would find that silver dollar. Then he came to that grove of willow trees. He climbed over the fence there. He looked. He went over to the tree where he had cut those willows to make his little whistles. But there was nothing shining in the sunshine. There was nothing in the grass that he could see. He walked as far as the pond, and he looked all along there. Then he got to where the schoolhouse was, and he saw that a bunch of the boys from his class were out playing in the schoolyard. And he thought, I don't want to go tell Father yet. I think it would be better to tell him later. It is always good, boys and girls, to do what you know is right away. But he didn't. He went into that schoolyard and he started playing with the kids. Pretty soon, he forgot all about the lost silver dollar. And then he heard one of the mothers calling, "Jimmy, Jimmy, come home to dinner." Frank then remembered the silver dollar, and he started to head toward home. And he kept thinking, what can I do? I don't want to tell Father. And the longer it was, since the time that he discovered that he didn't have that silver dollar, the more he didn't want to tell his father. He thought, it'll be easier this way. This'll be the easy way. Doing the wrong thing never is the easy way. So he went home and he sat at the table, and Father, he looked at him and all Frank's brothers and sisters and Mom sitting at the table, and Father said the blessing. Pretty soon, his brothers and sisters started talking all about the fun things they had done all day that day. You know, it was the first day of vacation and all. And Mother and Daddy listened intently. And while they were talking, Frank's father casually looked at Frank, who was sitting beside him. That's where he always sat. And he said, "Frank, did you carry the dollar to Widow Boardman?" And Frank, he didn't have time to think about it. He just opened his mouth and he said, "Yes, Father." And oops, immediately he knew that he had lied to his father. He hadn't carried that silver dollar, but part way and somewhere along the line he'd lost it. The widow didn't have her silver dollar. He didn't say any more. He ate part of his supper, but it wasn't fun anymore. Well, pretty soon it was time to go to bed. And Frank went upstairs, and every night he would kneel down by his bed and he would talk to Jesus about his day and any requests he had and the thank yous to God. But it was hard to pray, and he felt like maybe God wasn't even listening. It was getting harder and harder to keep his secret. He got in bed and he laid down. And then he would wake up and he'd roll over and he'd lay down again. And then he would roll over. He wasn't getting any sleep. This was awful. What could he do? It was the longest night Frank had ever lived. Well, finally, Frank must have gone to sleep, because when his eyes opened wide in the morning, he saw the sun shining in, and his mind went, "It's vacation time." And he jumped out of bed to get his clothes on. And then he remembered the silver dollar, the lost silver dollar. And he remembered the lie he told his father. Suddenly, The day wasn't nearly so bright, and it wasn't nearly so happy. Well, all day that day, he tried to be happy and have a good time, but it just didn't work. Finally, that evening after supper, Frank told himself, "You can't do this any longer. This is just awful. I have to go tell Father." Well, now it was really, really hard. It would have been easier if he had told him right away, but he thought it was easier not to say anything. Maybe Father would forget about the silver dollar. Maybe he wouldn't even know it was lost. Maybe he believed me when I said I had carried it to the widow lady. But then he thought, no, no, I am miserable. So he started down the hall. The hall wasn't very long, but it seemed to be the longest hall that Frank had ever walked down, and his feet just kind of scooted along, closer and closer to something awful. He knocked on the door. And Father's voice said, "Come in." Frank pushed the study door open, and there sat his father at the table, writing letters. Once again, his feet seemed to just scoot as he got closer and closer to his dad. He loved his dad, and his dad was a kind, good man. Why was he so afraid? When he got to his father looked up from his writing and he said, "Oh, Frank, what is it?" And he didn't look mad. He almost looked sad. And Frank started, he said, "Father, I have to tell you something. I. And Frank, even though he was a big boy, burst into tears, and he put his head down on that table and he cried. Finally, he sniffed and he rubbed under his nose and he looked at his father and he said, "Father, I need to tell you that I did." And his father interrupted him and he said, "Frank, would it be easier if I told you what happened?" Frank didn't understand that. But his father started and he said, "Well, you took the silver dollar to go see Mrs. Boardman. And you walked past the school, you walked past the pond. Now, maybe you stopped at the Willow Grove. Maybe you sat down along that log, in the log. I don't know. Did you get to Mrs. Boardman's house and you didn't have a silver dollar? You'd lost it, hadn't you, Frank? And then you tried to find it, but you couldn't find it. And then you told a lie last night, and you've been miserable ever since. Am I right, Frank?" Frank, he stood there trying not to start crying again, and he said, "Yes, Father, you're right. I did all those things, and I'm sorry. I thought it was going to be easier, and it was harder." And his father looked at him kindly and he said, "Yes, when you don't do what's right, you end up doing more wrongs, just like you told the lie. And you're always miserable. And what seemed like what was going to be the easy way became the hard way." Father, he reached out and he hugged Frank. And Frank said, "I am sorry. I am sorry. I lost it. I was careless. Oh, can you forgive me?" Well, of course, his father would forgive him. But being the good father that he was, there had to be a consequence or a reason to help make him remember not to do that again. So he told Frank, he said, "I want for a punishment, because you have to have a punishment, you know. I want you to take the rest of this vacation and earn that shiny silver dollar back and bring it to Mrs. Boardman." Frank sighed with relief. He said, "I will, Father, I will. I'll go start working right now." And he did. He managed to find little jobs and he earned that silver dollar back. Well, you know, the amazing part of the story was that Frank took the new silver dollar to Widow Boardman, and she was glad to have it. She did not know about it being lost before. Well, when Frank was on his way home, he felt light as a feather, like he could fly. He felt so good. And as he was happily marching along to get back home, he had been picking up his feet, and his shoe bumped against something hard. And he looked down, and what do you suppose it was? There in the grass was that shiny silver dollar that he had lost. Boys and girls, I hope this story helps you to remember that trying to take the easy way instead of doing the right way is the hard way. Thank you, boys and girls. I'll see you next week. Bye-bye.